Hello everyone, welcome back to Shred Guitar in the 80s. Today's part 2 of the little thing I'm doing on the guitarists and albums that influenced my life. The last episode we kind of covered the 70s right up through about 1983. So today I thought we'd look at 1983 through 1987. And this is more of what I call the shred years. This is the year that shred guitar really took off. You had all the incredible players on the Shrapnel Records label come out, the Paul Gilberts, Vinnie Moores, Tony Macalpines, all those mind-blowing players. You had some other players that weren't on Shrapnel Records that were mind-blowing also. So I thought today we'd cover the shred guitar players between the years 1984 and 1987. So let's get started. As I've talked about many times on my channel here, the first time I heard Yngwie play with Alcatraz on the incredible debut No Parole from Rock and Roll, it just totally blew my mind. I'd sort of heard of Yngwie through Hit Parader magazine. They were talking about this wonderkind guitar player that was playing out in the Los Angeles area with a band called Steeler. At the time, I didn't know Steeler had an album out on Shrapnel Records. I got that right after I got this. But I was sitting over at my friend Chuck's house, and I think it was a Friday night. We're playing cards, and all of a sudden on the radio came this song that I really didn't pay too much attention to at the time. And then when the guitar solo came in, everything stopped and my world changed. I'd never heard such clean, concise pickings. The speed, the clarity, that vibrato, the melodicism. Yngwie had it all. I mean, he was everything I wanted to hear in a guitar player at that point. It was just mind-blowing. And when the song was over, the announcer came on and said it was Alcatraz. Well, I had heard that Yngwie had joined Alcatraz, but I had not actually heard him yet. So I remember going to the mall, going to the record store the next day and buying the cassette No Parole from Rock and Roll and coming home and listening to the whole cassette and just staring at my speakers in disbelief. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was just so mind-blowing. I remember sitting down that day thinking, how do I pick fast? You know, what do I do? Do I cross strings with a downstroke or do I alternate? You know, it was very confusing. I could play kind of the Randy Rhoads, Van Halen stuff really well, but I couldn't do anything like the Yngwie picking. It just was incredible. And I've talked about my journey discovering my picking a lot on this channel. So if you're curious how I developed it from listening to these early Alcatraz albums, you might want to check out some of those videos. But I just devoured every solo, every note of this album. He became my favorite guitar player. It became Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, Richie Blackmore, and Yngwie Malmsteen. But Yngwie became my obsession. I just would learn any little phrase I could, any kind of lick. It was just incredible. And then I discovered the Steeler album a little bit later. I picked this up at a used record store. Actually, I went in there one day and there it was. Probably 6 months after the Alcatraz release, or maybe a year. And it was just, I rushed home and I had more Yngwie to learn. And I put it on and the solos were just as mind-blowing as they were on Alcatraz. Not quite as melodic, more just intense, you know, riffing with a lot of picking. I mean, he was picking like crazy on this album. And the solo on Hot on Your Hills with that acoustic intro with the fast descending kind of flamenco sounding picking. That was a little bit before I'd heard Al Di Meola, I think. So it was mind-blowing. I'd never heard anyone play like that, and into that unaccompanied solo. And I just sat down and tried to learn as many licks from this album as I could also. This was a little more kind of hair metal. At the time we didn't call it that, but kind of in that hard rock metal vein, the Los Angeles sound with the Rats and Motley Crue and Dawkins. Kind of had some of that flavor. I think Ron Kill was actually from Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken, though. But Yngwie didn't stay in this band long, but boy, did he make an impression. Another really cool thing was that this album was on Shrapnel Records, which I'll talk about more in a minute. So this was the next release I got from Yngwie. And then I was scouring the import section, and guess what I found? I'll never forget the day when I saw this sitting there. My new favorite guitar player put out this album. And I remember reading in Guitar World, there was an article that he did with Steven Rosen. And Steven Rosen called Yngwie the god with the chip on his shoulder. And I guess Steven wasn't real happy with Yngwie because the first time he interviewed Yngwie made him wait just like for like an hour and a half or something while Yngwie practiced. And then he was very elusive on his questions. I think Yngwie was trying to emulate, you know, what he'd heard about Ritchie Blackmore's Heroes, kind of being that way. So I think he was trying to cop some of that vibe also. That's just my guess. But anyway, Yngwie talked about that he just recorded an album in Japan. He was still in Steeler at the time. And so when I saw it in the import section, I rushed home and put it on. And it was just worlds beyond the No Pro from Rock and Roll songs in terms of they were totally different. It was so neoclassical. Guitar everywhere, just chock full of just amazing stuff. I mean, I think I'd actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I think I might have heard the sound page Black Star right around the same time. I think I actually got this before Black Star was in the sound page, or it was very close to it. In Guitar Player Magazine, they used to have these little flexi discs, and it would be like recordings. You could rip out of the magazine little plastic, records that you can stick in your stereo and play, and you could hear stuff. And Black Star was one of the songs that they featured, and I think Steve Vai actually did a transcription of it. So I can't remember which one I heard first, but I believe I had this first. But you know, the songs Black Star and Far Beyond the Sun, I mean, what a 1-2 punch, totally mind-blowing. And those songs are legendary and just still staples of Yngwie's playing. Now Your Ships Are Burned kind of had a little bit of Ole Roth's Cells of Sharon kind of in there. Evil Eye, which I knew from Alcatraz Life Sentence, which actually is right here. Should have mentioned that one. I rushed out and bought the Live Sentence album and devoured every riff on this. And I loved the solos on this, and I loved all the little fills. I mean, he was just ripping. And this is some of the, I think, the peak Yngwie in terms of picking and just overall, just, you know, his notes just sliced through and just were just incredible, the sharpness and the articulation of his notes. So this album was huge also. But this album, you know, Evil Eye, I knew from that. Icarus Dream Suite's the one that really blew me away with the Adagio intro. It was just so beautiful. It really moved me. And that piece is still probably my favorite Yngwie song of all time. As Above, So Below is kind of a vocal song. The Little Savage with the killer riffs into Farewell. I mean, what a classic. I just actually listened to this again last night. I hadn't listened to it in a while. And it just still sounded fresh and just great and melodic. And Yngwie's plans changed. He was actually a little bit more economical back then and lyrical. Not quite as ripping as he is today in terms of just, now it's just relentless. You know, but I love both. I love new Yngwie and old Yngwie. So this album is very special, and I wore this out. And I used to have a cassette deck I talked about where I could put in the cassette, and then I would just stop. I record all my albums on a cassette so I could figure it out. Then I'd hit the pause button really fast, and I could hear each note, then I'd tab it out. That's kind of how I figured it out. And then a little bit after that, I found this cool bootleg in a store. And this is, I think this is actually from a Stockholm, Sweden gig, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it was in Stockholm. I'm not sure, but boy, there's some great playing on this too, and I learned a lot of licks off this one. Great stuff. And then I found this really cool album. This was actually the Marching Out single that came out slightly before the album. And it has two killer tracks, Far Beyond the Sun and I'm a Viking. And Yngwie's tone and touch and playing on those are incredible. And they might actually be from the same as the Japanese video release that they put out, but I could be wrong. And I heard the first song from the next album, Marching Out, which I picked up right away. I think it was the summer of '85, and I'll See the Light Tonight. So Yngwie, mind-blowing. I can't stress enough what an influence he had on me, and just the possibilities of hearing a guitar play like that was just totally incredible. To hear someone play like that was mind-blowing. So Yngwie was definitely one of the guitar players that changed my life for sure. And then the next album I really got into, and I talked a little bit about this last time, was Akira Takasaki with Thunder in the East. This came out in '85 also, the same as the Rising Force album. And this was another one I just played like crazy, and Akira had that cool kind of Van Halen meets Randy Rhoads meets Gary Moore kind of thing happening. And this was another big influence on me. I talked about it last time, but I wanted to mention it since we're in the year 1985. Incredible stuff from Loudness. So I'll never forget, the first Guitar Player magazine I ever bought was in November of '82. And it was the one that had Randy Rhoads on the cover. It was just a feature and a tribute in memory of Randy Rhoads, the incredible Randy Rhoads. And I remember just devouring the magazine from cover to cover in study hall. I didn't do any homework or study. I just read guitar magazines. That's when I first saw the Spotlight column, and the guitar player who was in the Spotlight column in that issue was David T Chastain. So when I went in the record store, and I guess this was early '86, maybe spring of '86, and I was going through the racks, and I saw this sitting there, and it said featuring guitar player David T Chastain. I had to buy it because I had read that Spotlight column so many times in study hall from reading that issue over and over and over. I wanted to hear what he sounded like. So I took it home and dropped the needle on the song Hell on Earth, and was mind blown just with these incredible runs and the fluidity. And it was so cool and so unique, and his playing was just so fluid on this album. David T Chastain was just a huge influence on me. I would listen to this like constantly. Yngwie, David T Chastain became like my two guys. I love Chastain's playing. I actually went out and bought everything I could from him. The Seventh and Never came out, I think, a year later. And then he also had some really cool releases. Where are they here? Right here. All these really cool releases. So we have World Gone Mad. And that same year he released Praised Aloud, another incredible album. And then the very first one I got after I got the CJSS stuff was Mystery of Illusion. These are all the killer reissues on Dive Bomb Records. This was just amazing stuff. This album is one of my favorite metal albums of all time, and I love his playing. It's very neoclassical and super cool, and it's a Shrapnel Records release. So this is one of the early Shrapnel releases. He was actually one of the early Shrapnel guitar players. And then in '87 he released one of the greatest rock instrumental albums of all time, in my opinion, Instrumental Variations. I just love this album. The songs are great, the playing's incredible. You know, I just wore this album out with Rising Force. I think this is probably my top 5 rock instrumental albums of all time. You have the incredible Now or Never with that cool glissando harmonic minor sounding opening. Just amazing stuff. Definitely a must-have if you're a fan of 80s metal or 80s shred or just great hard rock music in general. A must-have for sure. So I'd read all the magazines, Guitar Player, Hit Parader, Circus, Kerrang, whatever I could find to find the new hotshot guitar player. And I remember reading about Vinnie Moore in Guitar Player magazine, and they talked about Vinnie being, Mike Verney, who did the article, said that Vinnie was going to be one of the next great guitar players. And he talked about his great right-hand picking, and his style was kind of early Roth meets Randy Rhoads. Right there, it intrigued me. It was right in my wheelhouse. So when I found this album at the record store, Soldiers of the Night by Vicious Rumors, I picked it up. And when I took it home, it was that natural extension to Yngwie. It was picking, and arpeggios. It was everything that was going on. And back then, you could feel it in the air. The fast, clean pick, classical influenced lines, the arpeggios, the wide, slow vibrato, the tone. All these players kind of were going towards a similar thing. I think that was started by Yngwie. And I think there's some other players on that same path that came out, because this came out really quick after Yngwie. So Vinnie was kind of going that direction. Yngwie might have influenced him to really pursue it even more, but you can definitely tell that Vinnie had spent years devouring, like, you know, Al Di Meola records and Uli Roth records and Van Halen. And he kind of blended it all together in a great style. And the songs in this album were just incredible. You had like Premonition, which would kind of foreshadow his instrumental stuff with Shrapnel Records. Blitz the World, just that incredible solo in Blitz the World blew my mind. Invader, another just unaccompanied guitar solo with just chock full of killer riffs and lines and solos, really unique in the way he played. Just amazing stuff. I can't say enough about Vinnie Moore and how big of an influence he was on me. So in early 1987, I went to the bookstore at the mall and bought the new guitar player. I'd buy a guitar player every month, and Los Lobos was on the cover. When I opened it up, there was a flexi disc in there of Vinnie Moore from his upcoming album, a track from the upcoming album. The song was called Daydream, and it was kind of right beside it. The flexi disc was right beside an ad that Vinnie had with Ibanez guitars. I got it around here somewhere. I've showed it on some of my videos. But I remember taking it home and dropping the needle down that sound page and hearing Daydream. You know, and Vinnie had took what he did with Vicious Rumors to a whole new level. And I could hear little elements of structure to Black Star and Daydream, but it was just killer, and the solo was just a thing of beauty, so melodic, so clean and articulate. I really think Vinnie was probably the cleanest guy from that era. You listen to his picking and his lines on that early solo stuff, it was just mind-blowing. I just wore this album out. Every song is a classic. This is another one with instrumental variations and Rising Force that I put in my top 5. Just incredible. The incredible In Control, that Daydream I just talked about, Saved by Miracle, Hero Without Honor, Life Force, NNY, Mind's Eye, Shadows of Yesterday, a beautiful kind of ballad, along with The Journey, kind of a cool ballad too. Just great stuff. I love this album. It's chock full of emotion, incredible playing. You know, Vinnie looked cool holding his guitar. It was just amazing stuff. So I went to see Vinnie in a clinic, which I've talked about on my channel here. And at the clinic, they were auctioning off, or they were just kind of raffle, I should say. And they were giving away this Vinnie Moore VHS, Advanced Lead Guitar Techniques. And a friend of mine actually won it. And they made me some copies. They were really cool, made me copies. I can't remember exactly who won it, but I remember I got a copy of it somehow. Everyone, all the players back then were really cool. We just shared stuff. There was no ego involved in any of this stuff. And this became one of the turning points in my whole life in playing. I watched that video over and over and over, and it's my favorite instructional video, along with probably the Paul Gilbert one, Eric Johnson's, and David T Chastain's. Those are probably my favorite ones. And Sean Lane's is pretty mind-blowing too, but I just would watch that. I wouldn't try to play it. But just amazing stuff. This VHS really had a big influence on me. And my favorite licks on this VHS were actually not what he showed. It was the stuff he played at the beginning. That intro guitar solo was just the best, one of the best things of that whole era. And I think I'm going to do an episode of Shred Guitar in the 80s where I break down some of those licks that I stole from that intro. So Vinnie, a huge influence. And I talk about him all the time on my channel, and I probably keep talking about him. Just amazing stuff. So I would go to the record store and just buy any guitar magazine I could find. This is the, what is this? The August 1986 issue of Guitar for the Practicing Musician. I would read Guitar World, Guitar Player, and I'd just read them cover to cover, every article by every player, and try every lesson. I would just totally, I was obsessed with this stuff. This issue was killer. I remember getting it in the summer of '86. It had a killer article with David T Chastain, who I just talked about. There's a cool photo of him holding a Kramer Beretta. He usually played a red Kramer, I think it was the Pacer Special, the one pickup Pacer. I love that guitar. Just a killer guitar. The one pickup with the Floyd Rose, man, it doesn't get any better than that. And then it also had a great article on Tony Macalpine, another player who would go on to become a huge influence on me, one of my biggest influences early on in the 80s. I just devoured his stuff. This picture here, he's playing a white Kramer Imperial, Kramer Pacer Imperial. I just love Tony's playing. I can't say enough about Tony's playing. And like the others, I first heard Tony with the sound page, the flexi disc in Guitar Player magazine. It was a song called Birds of Prey and had a really cool solo with Billy Sheehan playing bass on it. Billy Sheehan's bass solo was just great on that. But I love the track, and he did some blazing fast pick lines. Well, I was totally into picking at the time, and he had that sound that I wanted. So as soon as this album came out, Tony Macalpine, Edge of Insanity, I rushed out and bought it. And I think I got this in the summer also, that same year of '86, and just wore this out. And I was a big Iron Maiden fan. Some of the grooves kind of reminded me of Maiden on this album, but with just killer guitar playing. And you know, at the time, I compared it to Yngwie because the fast picking, the neoclassical kind of quality to it. But looking back, his tone was a little more like Randy Rhoads. I think he used an MXR Distortion Plus through a PV Classic amp, which is in the photo here. And there's that white Imperial Pacer. Just amazing stuff. This album was another album where I just would learn all the licks and devour it. And just, I'm going to have to do some episodes on this album and some of these other ones. You know, Wheel of Fortune, The Stranger, the Quarter to Midnight solo, Empire in the Sky, The Witch and the Priest. I used to play that in a band. The Taker. Just an amazing album. Tony was just super fluid, just an amazing keyboard player, a piano player, as well as a guitar player. And then not long after that, I think pretty soon after that, he released this Mars Driver album with Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo and Bob Rock on vocals. And this was another album I just wore out and devoured, you know, Nations on Fire, Writings on the Wall, Stand Up and Fight, Nostradamus, just killer melodic rock with just amazing solos. It was so amazing during that period to hear all these incredible players, you know, your Yngwies and Chastains and Vinnie Moores and Tony Macalpines. Just brilliant stuff. And then he would put out Maximum Security, another album I just devoured and loved and can't say enough about. Tony was definitely one of my biggest influences, especially early on in the 80s there. And I still love his playing today. And I just picked his new album up. I bought the download, actually. And I've been grooving on it. Equilibrium, I think it's called. And it's a great album. Still playing brilliant. And it seems like a really cool guy, too. I just saw him in concert a couple years ago, and he's really cool. So Tony was just a huge influence on me also. The next player I really got into was the incredible Paul Gilbert. And this was probably right around the same time I got Edge of Insanity. I know I got Edge of Insanity first. But I heard of Paul Gilbert because he was in Spotlight Calm also. And he was in the issue that had Frank Zappa on the cover. And I think it was early '83, if I'm not mistaken. And Yngwie was actually in that issue also. So you had Yngwie Malmsteen and Paul Gilbert in the same Spotlight column. I think the violinist Mark Wood was also in that issue. Just going by memory, I haven't seen it for a long time, but I used to read them over and over and over in study hall, like I mentioned. But this album, when I put it on, this album was rocking. This was full out rock. You know, he had like that Gary Moore humbucker sound through a Marshall. It was really just killer stuff. And the solos were so fast, and I could hear the Van Halen elements, and some of the licks were a little bit kind of like what I was going for with the hammer and pull-offs, kind of aggressive hammer and pull-off style. But when I heard his picking on some of this stuff, it was just incredible. I mean, he was so fast. I remember when I first put this album in, I thought, this guy's the fastest guy I've ever heard in my life. You know, that opening Frenzy and the Street Lethal. Just brilliant stuff. I think he was 19 when he recorded this, 18 or 19. He had won the Guitar Wars out in California and Los Angeles, and he was kind of making a name for himself. He went to GIT and became a teacher there. But, you know, Street Lethal was another one I just wore out and tried to learn as many licks off the album as I could. And then they released Racer X Second Heat not long after that. And the mind-blowing thing about Second Heat is there was two of them. You had Bruce Boyer playing guitar also. Just killer songwriting and playing and tone. This is my favorite Gilbert. Gilbert's still cool. He plays some cool stuff, but, you know, for me, when I want to listen to Paul Gilbert, I go back to the Racer X era for sure. All the songs on this are great. Sacrifice. There's a cool Judas Priest cover, Heart of a Lion. I don't even think that song is released. I think Rob Halford might have just gave them the song to, you know, go ahead and record. Motorman with the cool arpeggios. I think Bruce came up with those. The great Bowie cover, Moon Age Daydream. Living the Hard Way, Sunlit Nights is a really cool ballad, Hammer Away, a driving rock song, just chock full of amazing picking. And he started to do those really cool string skipping stuff, which was huge for me. And actually was kind of easier for me initially than the picking. Anything with hammer and pull-offs I could rock, but the picking took a little more. But eventually persistence paid off and I got it. But these two albums were huge for me, and I just, that Racer X stuff holds a special place in my heart also. One of the cool things about Shrapnel Records is they would put these really cool advertisements in Guitar World magazine, and I just couldn't wait to get the new Guitar World. The first thing I looked for is to see who the new hotshot was that was signed to Shrapnel Records. And I remember seeing, it was actually reviewing Kerrang of Speed Metal Symphony, and they said that, it was just Relentless Guitar or something. So I bought Kerrang at the local record store, independent record store. So I was standing there reading, and I went right over and bought this album, Speed Metal Symphony. And I remember I was at the record store after I saw the doctor. I was really sick. I had like a really bad head cold, and the doctor had prescribed me some cough syrup. So it was an interesting story. The first time I heard this album, I was kind of whacked out on cough syrup because I was supposed to only take 2 teaspoons, but I took a couple tablespoons by accident because I wasn't real bright, because I was just looking at guitar magazines in school and I wasn't paying attention to anything. So I didn't know the difference between a teaspoon or a tablespoon. So I took this and was listening to this album just kind of whacked out on cough syrup and listening to these incredible lines and the incredible playing of Marty Friedman and Jason Becker. And this album was so intense, and it was really heavy. It was heavier, more thrashy than the other stuff. But man, this is still my favorite Cacophony album, was the first one. I love it. Speed Metal Symphony is just a classic. That beautiful intro to Ninja, I still think it's a thing of beauty. And I hadn't actually heard this in years, and I broke it out and listened to it last night. And it sounded so fresh and cool with all the dissonant, they do all these dissonant kind of, outside lines mixed in with the really cool harmonic minor runs and arpeggios. Almost like 12-tone rows, kind of. It's cool stuff. I'm going to have to do some more stuff on Marty Friedman and Jason Becker for sure, because I listened to them like crazy. The interesting thing was I never really learned their licks like I did Vinnie Moore's, Tony's, and Yngwie. I just would listen to them as an influence, but I'm going to have to sit down and transcribe some of that stuff and maybe do an episode on them in the future. But definitely Speed Metal Symphony was huge. And there are all sorts of other classics featured in this ad. You got Second Heat, which I just talked about, the Tony Macalpine, Vinnie Moore albums. But then there were some other albums from Shrapnel in '87 that were just mind-blowing also. Apocrypha is just, I remember buying this album, taking it home, putting it on. It was real heavy and kind of had like, it was like Maiden and Priest kind of just turned up to 10 and sped up. But the guitar playing was great. It had a very Cacophony kind of feel to it, especially the second one. My favorite one's the first one here, The Forgotten Scroll. Just a great album. The guitar player was Tony Friedinelli, who would go on to play with Third Eye Blind. But back then he was just a young phenom playing these incredible arpeggios and really cool, harmonically, really cool lines with cool phrasing. And it was just really great stuff. This album I really enjoyed. And then I think I might have got this one right around the same time, maybe before Apocrypha. I think I got a little bit before Apocrypha. It's a Dr. Mastermind album. And this has the incredible Kurt James. What an underrated guitar player he is with his vibrato. Has that, he could play like Yngwie, kind of mixes Holsworth influences in there. There's a little bit of Hendrix. The songs in this album are great. And a song called The Villa is just a guitar, extravaganza. You got to listen to The Villa if you haven't heard it. It's just incredible. And he was actually friends with Yngwie. They would jam a lot, and he would join Steeler after Yngwie left. Kurt James is really a great guitar player and very underrated. And this is a really fun album, kind of speed metal, American speed metal from the mid-'80s. Great stuff. And then there was another guitar player. His name was Joey Tafoya. And Joey Tafoya would put out an album with Jag Panzer. And this is an American power metal classic. It's called Ample Destruction. And there are all sorts of cool songs in this. I listened to this one the other day too, first time in a long time. His playing is real slippery, really cool. He would go on to take lessons with Paul Gilbert and Tony Macalpine. and it would change the style a lot. But you could hear that touch and the technique and the speed was already there on this album. But by the time he put this out, his playing had grown considerably. And this is another essential guitar album for me, along with the Tony Macalpine Edge of Insanity. I put Joey Tafoya's Out of the Sun as one of the quintessential neoclassical, shred albums of all time. You have Tony Macalpine on keyboards. You got Butch Reynolds Carlson on drums and Wally Voss on bass. Wally Voss actually played in Yngwie's band during the Trilogy tour, and he just an amazing bass player. You can hear the Billy Sheehan influence on him from sure, with the two-handed tapping and stuff. But he was a really great bass player, and this is just some of the best tapping bass solos you ever hear in this album for that time period. The song Eternity's End was just a great opener. You had Out of the Sun with that really cool kind of chorus in it. I love that. 0 Hour had an incredible intro solo with Paul Gilbert, where I think he mentioned he used harmonic and melodic minor scales. It's really cool. I mean, just really creative and some of Paul's best playing ever. Then you kind of this cool ballad, the Summon. Stalingrad is really cool. I think that one quotes Mozart a little bit. Truce with Kings, Fire in the Lake, Samurai, and Nine Tomorrows ends with another nice ballad. Just a great album. I listen to this one all the time. And I actually have an instrumental track that's called Look to the Sun or something like that. And I paid homage to Joey Tafoya's Out of the Sun. And that's kind of my neoclassical kind of copping that vibe of Mike Varney's Shrapnel Records from the 80s on that track. So if you feel like it, check it out. I just put it up a few weeks ago. It definitely has the feel of this album, kind of with Mind's Eye and Edge of Insanity. But this album is another one I wore out, and he would change directions. Him and Vinnie would change directions after they did these killer neoclassical albums. And I never really got into the other stuff like I did the early stuff. This is, to me, where my, when I want to hear them play, I love this style. But they're both incredible players still to this day. And this album is definitely an underrated classic and one of the great neoclassical shred albums of all time. So Shrapnel Records was huge for me. But there were some other players that weren't on Shrapnel Records that could have been on Shrapnel Records. And one of them is Chris Impellitteri. And I remember seeing an advertisement for this album in Guitar World magazine. I think it was the one, I don't know, I remember there's an article with Vinnie Vincent in the magazine. I can't remember exactly which magazine it was. But I had heard of Chris Impellitteri from Kerrang! Magazine, and they did a really cool article on him. And Chris had talked about that he auditioned for Alcatraz, and he loved Ritchie Blackmore and Al Di Meola, and it kind of sounded right up my alley. So when I got this album, I dropped it down and was like, oh wow, it sounded like really cool Rainbow meets kind of Judas Priest. It has Bob Rock, who would go on to play with the Drivers album, the Driver guys. But this album was just blazing, and he would do these just blazing, really fast scales straight up the neck, just really cool stuff with some really cool arpeggio work, and the chord progressions is what really stood out to me with Chris's playing. He was a great songwriter. He wrote really great songs and really interesting chord progressions, as well as just blazing kind of solos. Just an all-around great stuff, and this album is just amazing. Then he would put out Stand in Line with Graham Bonnet, but I'll probably talk about that in the next episode whenever I get around to covering the years 88 to 90 or 91. But this in 87 they put this out, and then Relativity would pick this up and distribute it. I think the actual first album he put on his own label and called it Polydor, and I think it was kind of a tip of the hat because he was a Ritchie Blackmore fan to Polydor Records, who the label that Ritchie was signed to. But this is just a classic, chock full of killer stuff, and definitely could have been on Shrapnel Records real easily. He would have fit right in with the other guys. I did a whole episode on this incredible hearing aid release, the song We're Stars, which was kind of basically it was a benefit album for the African famine relief that a lot of musicians were doing in 86, 85, 86. And the cool thing is my buddy had taped this on VHS from MTV and brought over the VHS to my house and watched it. You can see this on YouTube, but all these different players were just shredding. It's the first time I saw Yngwie actually play in the video, and that was mind-blowing. George Lynch was just amazing on this album. Carlos Cavazo was on this. I loved his playing Quiet Riot. You had Buck Dharma from Boyster Cult, the guys from Twisted Sister. There was another guitar player that played in this. His name was Craig Goldy. And I remember he kind of did some arpeggios, and I thought, boy, who's that guy? He's really good. So I bought the Jeffrey album. He was in the band Jeffrey at the time, and I thought the solos were great. I wasn't so much into the songs as much. But when I found out he joined Dio, the first time I heard Craig was on this album called Intermission with Dio, and he did the song Time to Burn, which is just a great song, and I loved his playing on this. And I was a Vivian Campbell fan. I should have mentioned Vivian in the last episode because he was a huge influence on me too. One of my early influences, I devoured all that Dio stuff, and those 3 albums that he put out with Dio, especially Last in Line and the first one, were just huge for me. I remember trying to learn all those solos. He had that cool kind of Gary Moore feel. But when Vivian left the band and Craig joined, it was awesome because I could hear the little bit of the Ritchie Blackmore in his playing, which he's a huge fan of. And the song Time to Burn I thought was great. So when Dream Evil came out, I bought this right away when it first came out. This is the cassette I bought back in the day. I love the songs Night People. The title track Dream Evil is just great. Sunset Superman, super catchy. All the Fools Sailed Away, what a great song that is. And the cool thing was Naked in the Rain. A lot of the songs on this album, you could hear a little bit of that Rainbow vibe. You know, Craig joined the band. He was a huge Ritchie Blackmore fan. He brought a little bit of that Rainbow element to Dio, and I loved it. And his solos on this is super melodic with a really cool touch and just totally unique and great phrasing. And Craig is a really nice guy. I've chatted with him on YouTube a little bit, and he's still playing amazing. If you get a chance, check out some of the Rainbow stuff he's done in recent years. He plays like Mistreated and stuff like that. And his soloing is just great, super melodic and just shredding at the same time with a great phrasing, great tone. I mean, Craig is definitely an underrated player, and a player that really I used to listen to a lot back in the day, and I still enjoy his playing even today. A great player and a really nice guy. And this Dio stuff is just stellar and was definitely a huge influence on me for sure. But I really had a lot of fun sharing the albums that changed my life, all the albums that influenced me. There's probably a lot more. I'm kind of sticking to the rock stuff today. The next episode, I think I'm going to cover some more of the fusion stuff. Bands like Return to Forever and Al Di Meola. And some of the stuff that would come a little later. Another guy that was a huge influence on me in '86 for sure was Eric Johnson. In the next episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about Eric Johnson too. The next one I don't know if this would be the next episode. I might do some lesson ones and then come back to it. But Eric is another player that really influenced me ever since I saw him in Austin City Limits in '84, and I bought this Tones album in '86, and those fast pentatonics, those descending cascading fives and different things of the pentatonics was huge for me. So Eric was definitely a player from that era that was right there with all the others, and someone I'll talk more about in the future. But anyway, thanks for joining me on this trip down memory lane. I hope you guys enjoy this, and I'll be doing some more lesson videos and more of these too, where I maybe just pick one album and talk about the album and maybe, play a couple licks from it or something. I don't know. I'm going to try to have fun with this. It's a lot of fun doing this. But anyway, thanks for joining me. I hope you guys are all doing well. And to everyone that's left comments, liked, and subscribed, I really appreciate it. I think you guys are awesome. I really enjoy hearing from you all. And until next time, have fun picking.